We were gonna be starting in about 1 minute, so if there's anything you'd like to drink or eat, now's the time to get it because these two guys are gonna be talking nonstop for 2 hours. So if you're hungry now, you better get it now. Thank you for coming out on this hot day in July. We're gathered today to honor 2 of our esteemed citizens who were born here and have made this area of central Pennsylvania their home. Having grown up and gone to school together, these 2 gentlemen have shared memories of life as it was in their youth. Walter Malcolm, known to us as Walt, is the son of Dr. Malcolm, whose office was right here on Main Street, just right down from the library. And Jerome Leamer, affectionately nicknamed Diz, after the famous baseball player Dizzy Dean, was born 3 years earlier than Walt. Diz graduated from high school in 1954, Walt in 1957. Having known each other their entire lives and sharing merry and mischievous episodes, I'm sure we will be very entertained this afternoon. Liz would like to say a little something before we get started. Liz?
I can't ever say things little. There has been a miscommunications between myself and the board. I was under the impression that I was going to give a talk about athletics and the founding of the Juniata Valley School. Lo and behold, that's not what the board had planned. So they turned it over to Walter and I to talk. Well, that's not a problem. And when I start my talk, she's going to give us a little bit of an introduction. But I will tell you about Alexandria as I knew it. Born here in 1936, along with Chubb Thompson, and we grew up together. But we knew pretty much what was going on in Alexandria. So I'm going to talk about the things that I knew about during my early years. And then the second part will probably be what I would call the rebirth of Alexandria. Now, the rebirth of Alexandria came whenever the Hartslog Museum became a real, true life story. And it has just been a tremendous thing for Alexandria. Some of these people have worked their heart out to make this what it is. And guys like Sam and Molly have worked their heart and soul out. So there'll be some things mentioned in there for that. And then it might be the revolution of Alexandria as it plays today. What is happening in Alexandria today? So whenever it comes my time to talk, I will start with my early days. Now, I apologize for the misunderstanding, but we have set a date in November 10th.
November 10th, yeah.
And we're going to do the Juniata Valley thing, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, we're going to hand the microphone totally to Diz on November 10th to talk about Juniata Valley athletics. And I'm sure that he is going to be able to talk for a couple of hours just on that.
I think.
Yeah. So why don't we get started? Why don't we start with memories of school days? And Walt, would you like to tell us about your adventures on the first day of first grade?
Well, that was Rich and me. Rich Thompson, who sadly passed away, was killed in an automobile accident in 1965. But Rich and I were pretty much inseparable. But he was 2 weeks to the day older than me, and he had 2 brothers. I had one older sister, Patty. And girls don't think like guys. And we all know that. So Rich was influenced by Skin and Chub. And we were, Rich and I were, well, the first day of school, we saw nothing there. We saw a scramble of these things called letters and stuff called numbers, and we didn't relate to that. Oh, well, what's that all about? So we decided we weren't going to go to school. Nobody said anything about the word compulsory. My God, that's a really big word for a first grader. So I always thought Rich said to his dad, not going to school tomorrow. And Rich said, no, you told your dad. But we were both personally escorted to school the very next day. And we were there, and Mrs. Long, I don't remember what, she was always Mrs. Long. She ended up being, she's a daughter of Ethel Farrar, that some of you remember from junior high English. Well, let's see, where was I on this? We were going to school no matter what, and I said, Rich, and he had his older brothers. It was already, October, maybe early October. I'd go down from where I lived, down to where Rich lived, beside the Reformed Church. And then we would walk up the back alley. We always traveled the back alley. It now has a name. Somebody named it a number of years ago. But anyway, we walked and we were going to turn and go up the street. And Rich said, oh, no. I said, what? We're going to play hooky today. I said, well, I already learned about bingo. And there was a reason now to go to school because it involves numbers and letters. So school might be all right. So anyway, I turned to go uptown towards school, and he said, no, we go this way. I said, I don't understand. He said, never mind. We're okay. And I said, well, is hooky anything like bingo? And Rich said, oh yeah. Rich was the most prolific and, well, just simply the best liar I ever knew. I'm not kidding. He was excellent. So we're walking down the street, and we're coming down here on that side of the street, and we're getting right by Senator McAteer's house. That was right across the street from Uncle Hen's drugstore. Dr. Harry W. Grove. He is a historian himself. What a neat guy he was. But anyway, we're walking down the street, and Rich happened to glance backwards, and there was my dad coming down the street. He's going to the hospital. He's in his car, and he spots the two of us. Rich grabs a hold of me, takes me around the McAteer house and Providence, I guess. The garage, or the cellar door was open with those big, wide, double jobbies. Down into the cellar we went, in behind the great big old furnace. And I still don't know what's going on. I'm really dumb. But anyway, Dad comes down there. Of course, he always carried a flashlight with him because he's looking down people's throats and looking at for strep and all that other stuff. So he shines his light in here. Walter, I know you're in here. Where are you? Right here, Dad. I said, what are you doing? I said, well, Rich and I are playing hooky. I still didn't have it figured out how it related to bingo. But he hauled the two of us. That was an agreement that Guy Thompson, better known as Preach. Preach Thompson and Doc Malcolm had the agreement. Whoever caught either one of us, we both get the discipline. He grabbed both of us, put us in the car, took us up to Mrs. Long's first grade room, took us in. These boys were playing hooky. Well, first of all, going in, he spanked us. And then when I reached down in my pocket and pulled out a $1 bill, Dad said, where'd you get that $1 bill? Oh, I said, got that out of Rich's mom's pocketbook. We were going to go down to Barney Fliegel's store, get a jag of candy, and spend the day over at the island, where we spent a lot of time there in the summertime. And I thought that would be a very, very good idea. Well, of course, Dad did not. So because he said we stole the $1 bill, and I said we simply took the $1 bill, and another spanking. And both of us. And then when he told Mrs. Long that we had played hooky, she spanked. And we generally got the idea that playing hooky is something you have to be more secretive about. And I learned that if it's good things and bad things, that wasn't necessarily a good thing. But the person that enjoyed this more than anybody else, well, it wasn't Dad. He said it was going to hurt you. This is going to hurt you more, it's going to hurt me. Well, it didn't. But later on, the story got to Uncle Hen Grove. He must have laughed for 5 minutes. Because we got caught. And well, what the heck? Anyway, it was a long time before we ever played hooky again. Well, we played hooky again, but we got better at it. Well, that was the hooky story.
Thank you, Walt. Yes, you ever play hooky?
Yeah, I have a correction for you. Okay. Rich Thompson wasn't a liar. He might stretch the truth a little bit, okay, but I don't think he was a liar. My comment is how proud I was to be born and raised in Alexandria. And I can tell you a little story about pride about Alexandria. And I see a friend of mine over here, Dave Sharp, he can probably verify this little story. But there was a family on Back Street, Mr. Reed, who worked for the Wolvertons, had 3 children. The oldest child was Draper, a very distinguished gentleman, went to college and became a school teacher, ended up retiring at State College as a counselor. The second one was Brad, who graduated here in 1947, which was 1 year before the merger took place, but he did have the opportunity to play combined sports with Alexandria and Petersburg. But he was a great athlete, loved sports. And he had a feature about him that Dave would probably verified that he used language that was not becoming of a school teacher. He cursed quite a bit. As a matter of fact, after the locals played practice baseball, they always stopped at Hen Grove's drugstore to get a Coke or an ice cream cone or something. Brad would be out there cussing and carrying on, and finally Hen says, "That's it, you're out of here." And then the other one, I'll tell you a story about Brad, but the other one was a student that graduated with Chubb and I in 1954. Frederica, we called her Fritz or Freddie, and she married an attorney in Huntington and moved away from Alexandria. But the story I wanted to tell you about Brad, he was proud of Alexandria. He really was. He came back to the reunions, the school reunions, he'd come back to Hartslog Day, and invariably, he and my brothers would get together, drinking or soda or something, or having a hot sausage sandwich up at the Reformed Church. And Brad would start his story, and he says, "You know, I'm so damn proud of this little town." He says, "Every time I walk up and down this street," he says, "I just get the shakes. I start to shake." So today, I'm very proud to be from Alexandria. So when you see me shaking, you know what it is. Brad's coming after me. Now, before I go any further, I want you to meet my wife, Donna. She is she's put up with me for 66 years. She's not only my wife, she's my daughter. And she is the person that drives me.
Donna,
And
you've been married just 66 years? I mean, he said 66, but you might have been married 70. It's 40.
It's
scratch.
closer 70.
And while we're in it, there's my wife Jenny, who's in the back there.
Donna has given us 2 lovely children that led to 2 great grandchildren, and that makes us very happy. So honey, I do love you. Despite the arguments all the time, and oftentimes I hear the story, who's the boss? It says the Department of War. I don't make any discussions, any decisions unless I check with her. But it's been a good ride, those 66 years. Actually, both of our children were born when we were working in Alexandria at Julietta Valley. So they're sort of connected to Alexandria. One more thing before I turn it back over to Walter, and then it's my turn again. I have a lot of pictures out there. Please look at them. Some of them relate to Alexandria. I see some Petersburg friends here. There's some pictures of the old Petersburg Vocational School baseball team in there. What I did in my early years here in the last 15 years, I made a job of making videos, slideshows of all the Alexandria and Petersburg schools, going through their yearbooks. Incidentally, we just lost an Alexandria girl that lived at the edge of the bridge, Mrs. Yoakum. She was kind enough to lend me 2 yearbooks that I could take pictures of. So I have those. If you would like to see a private show, just let me know. I'll be happy to show them to you. Okay, Walter.
When we were talking last Wednesday about this event, one of you mentioned something called the Cracker Box. Does that ring any bells with you? Well, Did? Something about a gymnasium that was called the Cracker Box?
That was the Petersburg.
Yes.
Could y'all talk about what was called the Cracker Box?
It was an incredibly small gymnasium.
Yeah.
But it was the only one, the merger took place between Alexandria and Porter and Petersburg and the other township.
Morrisville.
Yeah, Logan Township. The kids got along with it very well. And 6, 7, and 8 went over to Petersburg from Alexandria. I'm sorry, not 6, 7, and 8. 7, 8, and 9. And the senior high, 10, 11, and 12, those kids came from Petersburg over to Alexandria. The buses would cross each other on the way. And I can recall Mrs. Isabel Irvin. She drove the guys' bus. For the junior high going over there, the guys rode in one bus and the girls rode in his Mr. in the upper end of town, his bus. Duty Black. Mr. Donald Black. Girls rode in his bus. And guys didn't always behave properly. And she would throw you off the bus. Now you had to walk. And as a penalty one time, I recall I had to walk for a week from, not to get to school, because you need to get to school on time, but to get home. And it took a little while. Learned a lot of things, so it wasn't all bad. A lot of interesting things crossing that bridge, the railroad bridge, and learned how to dodge out of the way of traffic on those one-lane bridges. But my dad said, "You will walk home. No hitchhiking, none of this. You will." And he made sure of it, and I did. But that was a pretty good learning experience. Wasn't designed that way. You can bet on that. But it was good for me. Crider's Hill. That was an interesting place to walk up that hill. Learn, just saw all kinds of things. Well, anyhow.
How about teachers? I wrote down at a meeting, a name, what was her name? Scully.
Oh,
Lance Scully.
Lance Scully.
Well,
This was a lot luckier than me.
Chuck
He
Thompson
had
was the
her
one that
for
did
3
Blanche
years.
Scully.
Black Scully.
Blanche, she was an excellent teacher, and she had a lot that didn't like her, but she was a good teacher. Very good. I had the fortune of having her in high school, and then I had an opportunity to teach with her whenever she moved to Huntington. But I would like to tell the friends here just about Alexandria in the early years. I hope it doesn't jump off your program here.
That's fine.
It's your program, not mine.
Alexandria, I was born in 1936 down here in Node Row. Now, I don't know if you know where Node Row is, but it's a little development here right across from where the Schaefer store used to be. And let me tell you, it wasn't the Hilton. Okay, we did have running water in the house, but the other things were not there. As most of the people who in my generation, unless they came from a wealthy side of the family, they were poor. Okay, we just existed like that. But life, in the first 3-4 years of my life, I remember that Alexandria, the main street, was Route 22. In other words, you came in to Alexandria up above the Brickyard, right down through town. If you were going to Petersburg, you went straight through. If you were going to Huntington, you turned right and went across the bridge. And after you got across the bridge, if you went straight, you drove back past Dave Sharp's home. And that led you out to the loop, to the Walker Farm, okay? That would not take you to Huntington. Well, it would in a roundabout way, but you had to turn left and go down what we called the River Road, down toward Lankert's, and then that eventually took you out through Hartslog Valley, up behind Lincoln Caverns, up over Warrior Ridge, down into Huntington. So what we had then is a lot of traffic coming through town, big trucks, whatever. And when we lived there, my sister was actually injured by running into a car or whatever. She survived, which was great. But there were a lot of things going on in Alexandria. We had 2 or 3 gas stations. We had the Keystone Garage. We had Duty Black's Garage. And we had one by the name of George Tennis. George Tennis was right below the Legion there. We had several grocery stores. We had the Schaefer store. We had Pollock's, wasn't Pollock's then, I think it was Gilligan's, or I forget, anyways, Lankert's we came in. And then, of course, there was a little grocery store right beside Melvin Lane's restaurant. This one I do remember. It was run by Bobby Baker's grandmother, okay? And it was just a little joint, and it later became Mike's divorce little place there. Sold everything, ice cream, whatever. But I remember that store because back then, most of the guys who worked at the Brickyard, they bought their groceries on time. So come payday, you went to the grocery store, you paid your grocery bill, and the owner would give you a pack of cigarettes. And if I would go along, I would get a handful of peanuts or something. So we had 2 tourist homes in town. So we were really trafficking for people coming through town for the tourists. And of course we had the Brickyard as our main industry. We had Phillips Fly and Tackle. We had Phillips Industries, and things were going along pretty good, but people were basically poor, okay, for the most part. And it was tough for people to really get ahead. We never had a car. We never had a phone. Our door was never locked. But it was an open door policy. I remember going to, you were talking about the gym. The gym that I grew up in was in Thompson's Barn.
Yep.
That's where we played basketball. Okay? We just got along. But the 2 big things that run in my mind that Alexandria had, in addition to the school, was the library, okay? And not only was it a place for education, but it was a place for entertainment. Upstairs was the auditorium. That's where graduation took place, that's where class plays took place, and that's where programs that the fire company put on was done up there. Back in the material back there is a copy of the Alexandria Minstrel Association program. Now, was this politically correct? I don't know. But it had all the names of the people who participated. Les Richel, Roy Shirk, Yokums, Patterson, Chilcote, Baker, Yokum, McAlevey, they're all named. And it named my father as one of the end guys. Whatever they did, I understand, was tell stories. I don't know. But anyway, that was upstairs. And I can remember of that, of the blackface, you know. And that was something new to me. But that was what happened in the community. And the fair company was, if you look at some of those pictures, excuse me, you'll see the pictures of the firemen. They were the identity that came with Alexandria. That and the baseball team. When I look at Bobby Roseborough here, I see baseball. Okay? His uncles, his grandfather was the manager of the Alexandria team for years. That was it. And when they played Petersburg, her dad would have pitched every game. If they were playing 7 games in a row, her dad would have pitched every game. There was a great competition between them. So the Alexandria identity came through the fair company and the baseball team and the library. The schools, somewhat. Okay, I might have a question or an answer or two later on.
Who was the guy that pitched?
Pardon?
Who was your guy that pitched every game?
Petersburg.
You don't know?
For Peter? I can't see.
Yeah, you could stand up and tell me who you are.
I'm Terry.
Oh, I didn't see, okay, I'm sorry. Dick.
Yeah, we all know.
Pictures up there of the old Petersburg team that your dad was in on it. Okay, it was just the way it was. And I will tell you this story, and I'll go off of that baseball thing. When Alexandria played Petersburg, if you were gonna rob a bank, that would have been a day to do. That was an event. And this one game that I truly remember, now this was after the war, mostly her dad would have been known for his duties as a pitcher prior to the war, although I'm sure he pitched later after that. But as you know, we age a little bit. But during the era that I can remember, I was the bat boy at this particular game. Petersburg was playing in Alexandria. And it's just at the same place it is now. The backstop is the same place. One of Alexandria's biggest supporters was the owner of the hotel, Mr. Sponsor. Mr. Sponsor would come to the baseball game and he would have a Pepsi-Cola case or whatever, and that would be his chair. He would put that baby right behind the backstop. And he loved to cheer. He loved to be a fan. Well, Petersburg had a couple guys that didn't like somebody telling them what was going on about the game. I hope this doesn't insult you, Terry. But one of the guys had big ears when it came to listening to what was going on from the fans. Dick Leitner.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sponsor, he had a way of getting Mr. Leitner's attention. And it got to the point, you know, Dick was playing center field and he come in and I'll tell you what, he beat Mr. Swanler into his life. He really did. He thumped him to no end. And they finally drug him out of there. And if it wouldn't have been for his brother, Dick's brother, Roy, got him separated and got to back playing baseball. But that's what competition was like then. Anyway, okay.
You mentioned the bank, and I think most people here know that the building catty corner across the street used to be the First National Bank. And it now belongs to the museum, and we are very happy that it does because we like owning it. It's not air conditioned, that's why we're here today. But Walt had an interesting story about a bank robbery in 1936, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And I've forgotten the story, but I'm sure Walt hasn't.
Well, I don't know when it was, Mr. Swigert, of course, and Mrs. Macaulay, Maud Macaulay. She ran the place, and he owned the place. But anyway, I was in there one day, I had a little bank that Mr. Swigert gave to all us kids. I think the ones that were in the Presbyterian church. I don't know where, and I forgot to bring mine with me today. It just looked like a little barrel. And encouraging us to save. And so, anyway, I'm in there one day, and I asked Mr. Swigert, I said, has the bank ever been robbed? I mean, it's a natural question. And he said, well, it was one time that he was a banker there for about 1 million years. It was 1936, and a guy came in a little bit desperate. He was armed, and he said, give me all your money. What else did he say? And so Mr. Swigert did. And the fellow proceeded to turn and go out the bank, and you notice the big side windows all around the bank. Mr. Swigert said to this gentleman, he said, you look over there at Cloyd Grove's Hardware. The hardware was there at the time. The front steps, it's 1936. There were a bunch of brickyard boys there because they were out of work, and that's where they hung out. They'd be there maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, just doing what guys do and just telling stories and so forth. And he said, now you notice every one of them is watching you. And you're not taking the bank's money, you're taking their money. And the guy, this would-be robber, looked over there and very openly, purposely handed the money back to Mr. Swigert and walked out the door. And the guys said hello to these guys as he was leaving. That was the only time the First National Bank of Alexandria was ever robbed, attempted to be robbed. And I don't know, Mr. Swigert concluded the story at that point. So I don't know if he went over and talked to those guys or not, but the bank, she did not get robbed. But that was it.
I think one of you mentioned Earl Sponsler. Is that the guy that?
Earl Sponsler.
Is he the guy that got beaten?
Yes.
That was his first name.
Somebody was mentioning that he had the hotel. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he had a bar in the hotel.
Yes.
And several guys would come and spend some money there in the afternoons and the evenings.
Well, payday.
Heyday.
brickyarders. And the brickyarders lived in a lot of dust and they got pretty doggone thirsty. And on Friday, they had a little bit of money. And they would go down to Earl Sponsor's bar, the hotel, picture of it here, and have a few beers. But Mr. Sponsor would require every one of them, before they get their first beer, to put $10 of their pay, write their name on it, take that $10, set it aside, so that when they were done drinking, they would have some money left. And he said, and if I do ever catch you spending that money for a beer, you'll never get another beer in this place. So he was a sort of a miniature governor, I guess. But the men all ended up, and the wives certainly respected that because they wanted their kids to get some food. And so Mr. Sponsor got some bad reputations, so forth. But one other thing, that he did, and Rich and I did this a couple times, go down to the Juniata River and catch a turtle. And pretty good sized turtle if you could get him. You roll him over on his back, the turtle is pretty much helpless. You bring that turtle up to Mr. Sponsor, and he would make turtle soup out of that and serve that to all his customers. And us kids would get a pound of Coke or whatever, thank you for it. But that only happened a few times, maybe 5 or 6 times. But the fun was in the catching the turtle. But that was just another thing. He was, all in all, Earl Sponsor was a good guy. But he wasn't often credited.
Yes, I think you were telling us also that your father died when you were 9, I think?
Yes.
And you told us a story about the school for boys, and I thought that one.
Well,
and your mother had to
it's sort of personal, but it's, we had moved from Notre Grove up closer to the high school, and it was prior to me entering school. So I started in first grade as a resident of the upper end of town. And 1945, the war ended, and I was 9 years old when my father passed away. And it was a tough time any way you look at it. But the reason he died, we had an epidemic in the community, or all over, I guess, with tuberculosis. My aunt spent 5 years up at Crescent. Finally had an operation where they removed one of her lungs, and she turned out coming home after 5 years and lived a pretty healthy life until the age of 90, I think it was. Some of you know her as Myrtle Rhodes, the sheriff of the old mill building in Alexandria, and she was just a lifesaver for me and my brother. But there were quite a few people from the area that spent time up there. My father was up there about, he went in January, I think it was, and he died in August of 45. And I I knew my dad to some degree, some good, some bad, but I knew he was a baseball nut. And I talked to all those guys that were in that red book back there that played baseball with him, including your father. We always talked about my dad. Well, I didn't know him about it as a baseball player, so I wanted to find out about it. So I got on to archive newspaper.com, and I found every book, every box score that Alexandria played in during a period of time. A matter of fact, the one red book back there, I have 7 of those. I can tell you the batting average, the pitching record of everybody that played back there. And I know your dad was a great baseball player, but you know who I think was a better baseball player? Tommy, Uncle Tom.
He said he had a major league fastball one time.
Tom was, and I wish I would have known that because we lived beside him in Alexandria. I never got to talk baseball to him. He was a fastball pitcher, as I understand it. No, your dad was great, and I owe him a lot for what he taught me
He loved the
about
game.
baseball.
Love baseball.
Yeah, he really did. But anyway, that's what I wanted to do. And in this process of doing this thing on baseball for Alexandria, I thought, well, my brother Carl was an outstanding athlete here at Juniata Valley. And when you come to the November meeting, you will find out just how good he was. There was 3 years that was really prime time for football. That ended in 1952, graduating class. Chubb's brother, Chubb was on that team. I was on it. Chubb's brother Phil was an end, great athlete. They had a good team. And Carl was just super. I wanted to give him something. So through the archive, I found every story that Juniata Valley played in, starting in 1947 up until 1954. 7 years. I call it the 7 years of the early years of Juniata Valley. Every game that was played, I have in the books. And Bobby Roseborough is going to take those books home today to show to his sister. Okay, that's what the stories will be about in November. It's very, very interesting. But anyway, I was doing this thing with the computer making slides of the different classes. So my brother said to me, he says, would you do one of those for the class of 52? I said, well, let me try it. So I started working with it, went through the yearbooks, got a lot of photos that I picked up from the Thompsons and family, friends, and so on. So I made this nice slideshow. I was proud of it. I was just proud of it, any way you look at it. So I told them I had it ready. So they had an annual reunion. And Carl was the president of the class, and he always invited us, to come. So this particular year, he said, would you put on that slideshow? So I did. Your brother Phil was there. All the guys were there. Your dad was there. Okay. And it's a nice show. And I'll be happy to show that for the class of 72. But it's a 10-minute program. Okay. If you want to see it, all you do. But I did that for my brother Carl, and he was very pleased. The books that I did for him, he passed away before I got it finished to give him, but he did see my program on the slideshow. So that was something that I really appreciated. That was just proof how strong I am about Alexandria and Juniata Valley. Really strong. And some of those old Alexandria guys are hard as nails.
Walt, you were telling us a story about P.J. Swigert and something called the cafetorium. Remember that story?
Let me start this one, and you can finish it. Okay, you can do the story
The
part.
cafetorium.
The
Yeah.
cafetorium.
1961 was the first year of the new school. Okay, Bob, you probably graduated in
First
that
class.
right? Yeah.
61.
Well, a couple years before that, both my wife and I were teaching at Juniata Valley. The first 2 years I taught in the old building, the old Alexandria building. She taught in the Alexandria building in the morning and then rode to Petersburg for the afternoon with Al Simpkins to go to the junior high. So during this process, we're talking about a school. We're going to build a school. Well, what are we going to put in it? She helped design the home economics department. I helped for the layout of the business department. And the big discussion at that point was, are we going to have an auditorium? Okay, Walter, it's your turn.
Well, right across the street, Dad and Paul Swigert, they had mailboxes pretty close to each other. One thing about Paul Swigert, every day he picked up pieces of paper, scraps, so on and so forth, between his house, where you live right now, and the bank. He picked them up and then out in front of the bank, make a little pile, and set them on fire, and burn that stuff up when it's all ashes, rush them into the grate there, and wash down the stream. He did that every day. And then he'd get his mail, Dad would get his mail, and the subject of the new school was current among everybody, and so forth. And Dad wanted there was this cafetorium where it would be as an auditorium and be as a cafeteria, part of the day, this, that, and the other thing. And Dad said, you know, we ought to build a new auditorium. We ought to build an auditorium on its own. And so he and Mr. Swigert got into it. And they really got into it. And finally Dad just drug him out of the bank, or out of the post office over into the bank, up to the stairs. I'm glad the door was open. And in there, and he said, Paul, I want all my money and I want it now. I can't do that. Well, you know enough, many of you knew my dad. What he said was, the hell you can. And Mr. Swigert was convinced. You better do it now. And thank you, Mrs. McCauley. She was a saint. She got everything all together and squared up and all the numbers and all the rest of that. Maybe 45 minutes later, Dad walked out of there, went over to the Petersburg Bank, and, was Mr. Lambert? I think he was, well, he and one of the great teachers I ever had, Mr. Henry J. Stepp, was a board member over at that bank. And he got everything squared away, and for the rest of his days, Dad did his business over there. But the essence of that was that Dad, in the argument, no auditorium versus auditorium, there were some men in the area who were opposed to an auditorium being built by itself. And that argument got pretty heated in the school board things, and it wasn't real pleasant. But these people were the winners of the argument, and so they had the combination cafeteria auditorium for some number of years. And I was never subject to it because I was already graduated from school and not part of the Juniata Valley at the time. But some number of years later, the pressure was on the community, all parts of the community, to build a really good auditorium, which they did. And it is a fine, fine auditorium at the cost of $6 million. So instead of that being an additional maybe $500,000 when the whole school was built, we the people paid a very dear price for that. But Mr. Swigert won for the day. But obviously, I like to think Dad finally won the argument. But anyway, that was, and Paul Swigert lost a pretty darn good friend. And they were both members of the Presbyterian Church up Back Street here. And they both sat in the same pew. Dearly beloved, the Lord had his problems keeping the peace between the two of them. But that was the nature of those two gentlemen.
We were talking about not only teachers, but people in town, like heroes, villains, and bullies. I'm sure that both of you have some stories about your heroes, villains, and bullies. I'm sure there were no bullies though, or villains, and obviously.
Who am I talking about?
Oh, Donna knows this one.
Well, I will tell you this story, but then I do want to tell you about some things that happened on Alexandria's Main Street. But the story that which sort of relates to baseball a little bit and school. I was in second grade at the time. Teacher was Blanche Black. Now, I don't know if any of you old people, old like me, can remember that. She was a real strict disciplinarian.
Her name was Rachel.
Yeah.
Rachel Black. I don't remember that. Anyway. It was second grade, and of course I was named Diz. Everybody called me Diz, and I thought that was my name. So one day we're going through the process of learning how to write properly, and you had those little 7x8 papers. You lines all over them, put your name on it, pass it forward. So I put Diz on top of my paper. So when she got the papers, she says, "Who's this Does?" I says, "I'm Diz." And she was known for this. She picked up a eraser from the board, and she held that baby at me. Well, I got it. And the story, I went home when I told my dad about that. I said, "Dad," I said, "she threw an eraser at me." And he says, "Well, did you catch it?" I said, "No, I ducked." So that was flashback, and of course there's scans of stories we could talk about some of those teachers, but I think maybe we'll let them rest a little bit. I want to tell you this story while it's on my mind about Main Street. In Alexandria, we have several barbers. Rash Eisenberg, right across the street. Paul McAlevey later on, uptown. Bob Lighty operated a barbershop under the bank. And then there was the famous Keith.
Morris Keith.
Morris Keith. Now, if you never had your hair cut by those old hand clippers, you missed a real chore. Okay. Morris lived right across from the Clover Farm store. And he was a fine old gentleman, loved to fish, and he made sinkers. He would go over to the Keystone Garage and get the old tower weights, melt them down and the sinkers, and he would have them available for his customers that come in the store. And he loved coffee. He loved coffee. He called his wife Babe. He would be working on you and he'd say, "Babe, I need a cup of coffee." She would bring him out a fresh coffee and he would proceed. So, and when he was not cutting hair, he would have a coffee and he would sit out in front of his little house there, which was a duplex. It was just a small porch and he had a little bench there. He would sit there drinking coffee. Now this is Route 22 going through town. So the story, I didn't see this, I didn't hear this, but the story is that this guy's coming through town and he sees Morris out there drinking his cup of coffee. So the guy stops and says, "Hey, General, can you tell me how to get to Pittsburgh?" Oh, Morris, drinking his coffee, he says, "How do you know I was a general?" He says, "Well, I just guessed." He says, "You just guess your way to Pittsburgh." That's just one of the personalities that existed in town. And that haircut from Morris was a treat. It pulled more than it cut. Okay, thank you.
Do you have any villains, heroes, or bullies? Walt?
Well, the way I heard the Morris Keith story was this fellow was going to New York, not to Pittsburgh. But it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. And it was Colonel. And Morris had a way of looking out over his glasses like that all the time. And he said, this fellow said, "Well, Colonel, which way is it to New York?" And he said, who the hell told you I was a colonel? I just surmised it. well, just surmise your way to New York. But it was essentially the same story. And he was a feisty old guy. I got my hair cut there once. And then Dad wouldn't let me get my hair cut there anymore. But I never knew why. And he would sit out on that porch, chewing his tobacco, spitting out on the sidewalk, watching the world go by, and every now and then, somebody'd come in for a haircut. And they weren't very expensive, but they didn't need to be. But he was a character. And his wife, she was dutiful to him, but there was another old fella out in the loop that had a liking to his wife. And I forget what this gentleman's name was, but he lived, the loop road there. And he'd come in and visit every now and then. Morris Keith became more than a little bit perturbed about that. But life went on. That was I forget what that guy's name was. But he was a long time resident of the Loop Valley. Same story, Liz.
Yeah.
Just a different direction. And it must have been true since we both heard it.
You know, we had the meeting the other day. I don't think anybody talked about Water Street Inn, but you must have had some stories from the Water Street Inn, right? Either one of you? No? Never heard of the place?
Tell you what, if you just let us go, we'll hammer this out.
Okay.
Again, Main Street, okay, most of you know that 1939, when they had the wreck up from your home, where the bridge went down, and there was a family of, I think, 3 that was killed in it, and it was a real tragic experience. Well, what was interesting about that, it tore the south end of the bridge down. And unfortunately, my brother and 2 of his friends were coming home from swimming. So they were on the bridge when it went down. One of them was a 7-foot boy, and I think the other was Ben Jones, I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, and my brother always told the story that he was complaining, get this metal off of me. So when they lifted he says, my legs are broke, get this stuff off of me. So when they got it off of him, he jumped up out of the water and up over the hill. So the other thing about the bridge going down was the tragic deaths, of course. But the truck was loaded with cigarettes. And I think I gave 1 pack of it to the museum. On the truck, I can't remember. It's in the archive someplace. But everybody was smoking these cigarettes for a long time. And,
that was shortly after my dad came there. He was called in on that.
and Davy Sherman could probably remember when that happened, because they built a walkway up the river across. So
Swinging bridge.
well, it could have been, yeah. Alexandria was playing a baseball game that day, I know that. So anyway, I gotta tell you about Hall and Egley. Okay, if you look across the street where the house is there now, and there's some pictures up back there. There was nothing there in those pictures. It was just a black lot. And the one picture is taken toward the fire hall, so you can see the fire hall, but there's no house built. So apparently, when that was built by Dr. Nickley, and I have no idea, but that was the new home that I knew of. And my brother and I were good friends with Hall, because Hall had all the latest toys. Okay, if you wanted to ride tricycle, you go see Hall Negley, you could ride his tricycle up and down the walkway here. So Hall was sort of fed with a silver spoon. He had everything going for him. And we did a lot of things together. And one of the things that we did was hang around the fire hall. Go to the fire hall, they had carnivals all the time, you know, and everything that happened in the community was around the fire hall. And they would pull the fire truck along the street here. Well, my brother Carl, 2 years older than I am, and Hall Negley, we climb on the fire truck. I'm in the passenger seat, Hall is up in the back part of it. My brother Carl is in the driver's seat. And he's one of these, you know, just having a big time, shifting gears, whatever, you know. First thing you know, the fire truck starts down the road. Luckily, Emery Chilcote, who lived over on South Side, your neighbor, he's coming up street, he jumps on and pushed my brother out of the way and got the thing stopped. But wouldn't have, we'd been over in the library yard. So, my brother always liked to tell that story, so there it is, Carl. The fire hall was the interesting place. They had the carnivals, they had bingo. Saturday nights they had dances, and it was a good meeting place. They played pool, they had a pool table, they played pool, and of course they had a poker table. So every Sunday after church, about 1 o'clock, the fire siren would go off. Well, everybody said, "What's going on?" "There's your fire." After a while, you learn that is the signal that the poker game is about to begin. And it was sort of a just give and take type thing growing up in Alexandria.
The fire hall was just where Denise Barefoot lives now. It wasn't that big building, it was just that little building where Denise lives.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. Yeah, the little barn, the little barn, yeah.
It's in the park now.
Yeah, absolutely. But I remember the joy of going there with my father, and there's some pictures back there of your dad, Bob, my dad, and Charlie Ross. Charlie Ross was the fire king. Everything that happened in the fire company, Charlie Ross had his finger on it. And it was a good time for kids, really. That was the only excitement we had. And I can remember we had no phones for the most part. And of course, television was late coming to Alexandria. And whenever it was coming through, this would be, I can't even put a date on it, but when it come through, the fire company's gonna have a TV. So, big thing then was Friday night fights. You used to listen to them on the radio, or as television matured, they were on TV. Well, I could still see all the guys gathered around the TV upstairs at the fire hall, and they're trying to get a connection to watch the fights. And I can still see Charlie Ross there, he's holding a mirror out like this, and he's back in the background, swinging around. I think you got something there, Charlie, somebody yelled at you, and all you see was the snow. You never did get any pictures. But eventually, television made its scene in Alexandria when they had the 2 channels, and that was interesting.
Yeah,
It was.
that was a gentleman from Huntington. They had the cable company. Isaac, what was Melvin Isaac?
Yeah.
He was very instrumental in bringing television to town, 1 channel at a time. But Diz mentioned about the fire company and that single building. And I was immediately thinking about an incident that almost killed this town. In fact, a goodly number of people wrote the town off. Forget the spirit of the people. And that was a meeting that was held in the fire hall between the union of the brickyard employees, and its management. And manager's name was Mr. Mickey. And he showed the boys in the brickyard, he said that the company was actually losing money. Now, the brickyards down in Mount Union area, there were 16 of them over the years, and there was 1 in Alexandria. It lasted from 1904 to 1954. Well, this was late in the year in 1954. And Mr. Mickey showed these guys, he said, we lose money, but you are good, hard workers, and this silica brick is the best we have. And silica brick, along with from up on the mountain here,
Phillips.
no, not
Clay
Phillips, the clay banks. The Phillipses owned it, but the Sherm boys did all the work. But they had that clay which they would dip into the bricks, and it just made a seal, and as soon as they were fired, it formed a real solid unit, which lasted in the blast furnaces out in Pittsburgh for about 30 days, and then they'd have to be replaced. Well, they had 9 kilns in this brickyard, constantly putting bricks in. They needed to be fired for 30 days, and they were then cast into, or melted, not melted, but fused into a solid piece that could withstand temperatures and the 26 to 2800 degree temperatures. And iron melts, and iron ore, and that reaction takes place at about 1900 degrees. And so in these blast furnaces, there you were up on the mountain here with the Hatfield Fire Clay Company, the brickyard, and the railroad traveled through here at that time. Oh, Rich and I had a lot of fun with that railroad. Oh, we loved that thing. And go right up to Hollidaysburg and switch over and out to Pittsburgh. And everything they needed came from this region that they needed to operate the blast furnaces. And then Mr. Mickey showed them that. Didn't work. Said, "You're lying, Mr. Mickey." And he said, "We are not, and we're gonna shut down the brickyard." "No, you can't do that." Well, they did. So that was the end of the Alexandria brickyard. And my dad, I remember my dad saying about that, he said, "Well, it's not all bad news. Because these guys Dad begged them for years to wear their masks because of dust and dirt there and so forth. Please wear your masks." They wouldn't do it. It was kind of like a hero thing. And Dad got into an argument with a friend of his from down Burnham. They were classmates in college. And I like to say he and the one in between, Dr. Helfrich, the three of them were all graduates of the same college in the same year. And they all went to different medical schools. And Dad said these guys would be working around the kilns, their backs would be cold in the winter, and they're sweating like anything in front, and constantly catching colds. Well, the new age cure-all was penicillin. And Dad would give them a shot of penicillin. And next thing you know, they're back to work. Well, that was in a day when no work, no eat. There was no sideways help, no protection, no relief, any of that. And so Dr. McNabb and Burnham would say, well, these guys are going to have an immunity to penicillin if you keep doing that. And Dad said, "I'm sorry." He said, "They will not wear their masks. They'll all be dead of silicosis before they're immune to the penicillin." And sorry, but that was the case for a goodly number of them. The last one I remember, and some of you I know remember this fella. His first name was Bernard, I think, but we all called him Lardy. Lardy Eidinger. Lived up along the road up here. He was the last survivor of that group of men. All the Eidingers worked there, and they all sadly died of that. But that was the otherwise story. That was
Walter,
not the fun thing.
they were going to call a strike. That's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, it's exactly what they were
And
going to do.
Mr. Mickey told them, if you do that, we're going to close it down.
And they did.
And they did close it down.
That's exactly
Now-
what I was saying.
The brickyard did a great job during its life, but the steel industry was changing too, because they found a different way to use the line the kilns. They were spraying on information or cement or whatever.
So that came on some number of years.
Yeah, but it was in the process. The thing I would like to mention about the kilns is that most of the guys in Alexandria at the time would remember that in addition to the brickyard, we had a bum. I don't know what, we had a lot of bums that lived at the brickyard.
We're talking about Huckleberry Hill.
And these guys, it's right behind, the old gas station there at Alpharetta, up in that wooded area there.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was in the
that's just where they camped. And what they would do, they would gather up their tin cans and so on, and they would take them up when the kilns were working, and they would cook their soup there. And of course, they made the route through town, knocking on your door, you know, trying to get a free handout, whatever. But this was an everyday occurrence. But the ornery guys at the brickyard, they would upset their soup or whatever, you know, try to get rid of it. But that was part of life in Alexandria too, the brickyard. And later on, it was bought, and the people that bought it was doing what you were saying, making this new compound that they used in the kilns.
You had the clay bank out there too.
So,
what was that? Somebody.
So can I say a question?
yeah,
So when the brickyard shut down in '54 up here, that must have been long after they were done quarrying above Frankstown Branch and above Fair, right? That was the only, like, they all consolidated to that quarry.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
quarry up
yeah,
on top of
that's
the
right.
When
yeah.
did they quarry, like, on Tussey Mountain above Frankstown Branch above what's now Rusty
Yeah.
Trails?
Yeah, you're right.
Because if you go above there, I still find dinky wheels, cable, rails, all that stuff on that side.
on
Well,
the western side of the mountain. And you look at it from just about where Donley's are, you can see the tram roads
Yeah.
as they're bringing them in. And they use mules, sure-footed mules. To pull, they would pull the empty cars up the mountain. Hand
It
loaded,
was, yeah.
and gravity would bring them down. Gravity, and thank God if you brakes don't work.
No, I have not been up the trail for years and years and years, but sometime back in my early life, we walked up there after the railroad was done or close to being done. And there was a bridge across to the river, and you were talking about the tram roads, and I remember seeing the mules, whatever they were, they would pull the cars up, and they were bringing, this is for brickyard, the stones were going to the brickyard.
Yeah, it came down the mountain
Yeah, so
around.
that over there with all
As
the
a matter of fact, there was a family that came here that, probably a lot of them, Watsons. Who's your buddy, Everly married to?
Donna.
Donna Watson. That family came here to work on the tram roads up there and so on.
Last time I was
They were
over, a
connected.
couple cars already had, found an animal on the ground and some track still there. That was about 20 years ago.
Yeah, I had a whole bucket full of spikes and one piece of rail from up there,
still on there.
about this long, so forth. They were fairly thin, small rail. But if I told you I found any ties, you know I'd be lying.
No, there's still ties on there.
Well,
These on New Mountain stuff, there's supposed to be ties, on 1,000 steps.
My great grandfather came and helped build the brickyard. I have a brick stamp on 1904. From what was in one of the first bricks, probably ever made there.
probably
Uh,
rough work.
Let's talk about Halloween. Halloween was a big event for guys my age, to go around and try to get candy or whatever. And if you didn't get any candy, we had enough corn that you would corn them a little bit, you know. So either you give me some candy or you get corn. Now, the older guys, they handled Halloween a little bit differently. And I'm sure you recall that up and down the street here, that everybody had a two-holer out back. Okay? There's a proper name for it, but that's what I'm gonna call it, a two-holer. And because we did not have indoor plumbing in many cases. So one of the older guys' tricks was, hey, let's go upset some double holers. And that was a tradition. And I can still hear my neighbor, Bobby Lloyd, coming out, telling my brother Carl, that he says, of course, he had a little stutter with him in the way. He said it was real funny. He says, hey, Carl, somebody upset Mrs. McMahon's shit out. and periodically, you would see one sitting around someplace where it doesn't belong. I remember going to school one day, and I looked up in the flagpole, and guess what's hanging on the flagpole? Somebody's outhouse. That's the older guys. Walter and I wouldn't do anything like that. But one of the things that happened with people that you give the corn treatment to, we thought we were really getting at them. But what they would do, they all had chickens. So they would get out the next day, sweep up the corn, feed the chickens. So what goes around comes around. The Juniata River, you had mentioned, Walter, that we spend a lot of time on the Juniata. You mentioned about Van Hockey and going over to the island. Of course, back then you were either playing ball or some kind of sports, or you were swimming in the river, or you were tubing in the river. We did a lot of tubing and do a little fishing. And I can remember one of the events along the river, we would get down there, build a fire, you know, and throw a baked potato, or a potato in to bake it and have eat, you know, and do a little ice skating, whatever. But I remember when the polluting that would take place, from the roaring spring paper mill, okay?
And Williamsburg.
Yes.
Yeah, and whenever they would discharge it, it looked like coffee. And it was really, really ugly. And you would see these massive carp up along the bank, and it wasn't pretty at all. But that's where our swimming pool was. Okay, the swimming pool was accessible from the south side of Alexandria. And I told this story the other day when we had a little meeting at the bank. I was for football, and Walter's dad was always the guy that gave the physicals. And he did the normal stuff that they would do. And I says, Doc, I said, I got athletes. What? Is there anything you can do about that? Yeah, he says this. He says, the next time you go to the beach, he says, just run in the sand. He says, I don't take care of it for you. I says, Doc, I've never been to the beach. I've never seen the ocean. And I says, and furthermore, the beach that I go to, they don't have any sand. He says, well, where's that? I said, over in the south side. Where's that? I says, over in Bear Ass Beach.
That's what he said.
That's where the swimming pool was. And,
Hey, Des, I was waiting for you to mention what it was. I said to her before you said it, the BAB.
well, that was a big
About every year.
and it was male-only beach. I can remember Ralphie, would have been your uncle.
Yeah.
He always, when he came to town from the Walker Farm, he rode his horse. And he would always end up at Bear Beach. He'd take the horse right down there, and he just loved to get that horse, and then he would dive off of it in the river. And, yeah. The beach was not much sand, a lot of stones, and a lot of glass. So, we mentioned Thompson's Barn. That's where I got to play a little bit of basketball. And when Chub's mother passed away, he didn't get to play too much basketball because he was cooking and taking care of the house, and his dad was working at the brickyard. But Phil never did that. He was out there playing basketball with me and everybody else. Phil, we called him Skin. Just like we call Bob Chop. Never put that together. Why is one Skin and one Chop? Anyway, there's probably a separate story. But somehow the guys put a little basketball court in there. And we played there every evening after school and on Saturdays, whatever. And we had one guy that, Jim Simpson was his name. He was cross-eyed. And he was look this way and shoot that way. Now, I don't care who your coach is. How do you teach that guy to put a defense up to that guy that won't show? I did learn how to handle a little bit. I knew if he was looking that way, he was going to shoot that way. So, he was one of the guys that played there every day. And,
That barn is still alive. Because the year was 1963. There was an older gentleman here in town by the name of Roy I. Grove. Roy Isaac Grove, father of Bob Grove, builder of many things. He built my dad's addition onto his office when Dad started there in 1936. And Roy I. Grove always had a cigar in his mouth, rough, gruff. He died up on the ridge here, and his family hunted up there on the ridge all the time. And he shot when they were doing some doe hunting, and my dad was involved in this one as well. He shot 6 deer, bang, 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 and in the excitement of it all, Roy I. Grove fell over dead. But he would not release that barn. He loved that barn. Well, his wife, Imogene, didn't have that same passion for the barn that he did. And this was the barn that Diz is talking about. And it's a famous barn. Lots of things happened in that barn. And so we made a deal, Rich and I made this deal with his wife. We tried to talk her into giving us the barn because she wanted it out of there because it was a liability. Because somebody playing basketball is going to get hurt, going to sue, and all the rest of it. She made Rich and me buy the barn. $5. We had to sign it, we had to give you a receipt, we had to do all of that, but it was proof that if we got hurt taking that barn down, it was our baby. And that barn floor that you're talking about is the subfloor in the cabin today. And Rich Thompson was always putting his initials everywhere. And one of them was on one of the barn sideboards on that barn floor, RT. When we took the barn down, we actually dismantled it. It was Tom Simpkins and Tim Speck was involved in this, and myself. And it took us from the 4th of July to Labor Day to take that barn down. We took it out, we measured all the pieces, and that year, that winter, Tom designed a cabin based upon how many logs we had this size and how many of that size and so forth. Worked okay. But Rich's initials, RT, when we're looking at the boards and we see that, because those boards, the 1-inch boards, became the roof of the cabin. There it is, RT. I took a saw and cut that off, and that's still in the cabin. You could never get rid of anything like that. My goodness sakes. That's precious. But that barn is very, very much still alive.
Good. Good.
And we use every stick, one way or another. But anyway, I'm glad you mentioned that about that old barn.
How about Melvin Lane? Anybody remember Melvin Lane?
Birdman.
Well, Melvin,
No one had the
was in a family, and he had the restaurant right across the street here, which is where we all gather. Okay, after school or in the evening, whatever.
The kids in the lower end of town would catch the bus there on the way over to Petersburg.
Yeah, yeah. But if you had enough money, you could go to Melvin's, and his daughter, Jeannie Lane, would wait on you, and you could buy a soda or a coffee or whatever, and then you could buy a penny pretzel. So you could suck on that pretzel and drink that soda for a half hour. And if you had any money left, any pennies left, there was always a pitching penny game going on out at the steps. And you might go out and gamble a little bit. But Melvin Lane was a gem of a gentleman. He was very well known for his work with trees and stuffing birds, the bird man. Great guy. And one of the things that probably most people don't know about him, that he worked like for Phillips Line Tackle in a way, not directly, but he would go to Cuba during the winter and guide for fishing trips. And I can remember him telling me stories of guiding Ted Williams, the famous baseball player. Now that's pretty cool, I would think. But Melvin was a good guy, and that's where we hung out. And when we were done there, we weren't playing pennies, we would go in next door to the Speck home. That was like an open door policy. You could go in there and talk to Mr. and Mrs. Speck, and Mr. Speck was a good guy. He taught people how to drive pretty easily. He said, "You sit in this chair, and I'll sit behind the wheel." He says, "Now watch me." And I said, "Well, how do you know which side of the road you're on?" He says, "You see that hood ornament right there?" He says, "When I'm sitting here, I look at that hood ornament, and I know where the center line is. I know how far I am. That gives me my guide. And I remember telling her that too, but I remember telling my kids that. It was just a little simple thing. But Johnny Speck was a good mechanic, and I loved his wife. His daughter married one of my best friends, Donnie Allison. So that was a part of our everyday activity. John Horn. Who can forget the Horn family? They were pillars in the community. Had that big home up there, and everybody was welcome. The kids were there, and they would bring their friends in, and there was always ice cream available, and they were great with the scouting program. And in their garage, the little barn there, the horse barn or whatever, that's where the Boy Scouts met. And they kept their equipment in there. Well, every now and then, guys my age, we had campground up on Pine Hill. Now, where's Pine Hill? Right up behind the Legion, behind the old cemetery. You go up there, I'm sure there's some stories up there someplace where we would take the hammocks and hang them up, have a fire, and that's where we spent the summers. Horns were just fantastic people. And they were great, community-minded, for both girls and Boy Scouts. And of course, you know the Horns as well as I do. And I think one of them owned at one time, maybe not, where the old sawmill used to be. Do you remember that is, Rush Walter?
Yeah.
Up behind the post office, where the post office is, there was an old sawmill in there, and they had it built up, elevated, apparently for use of the railroad. But they had it was quite an operation. I never saw it work. I don't know how it worked, but I remember we spent a lot of time there. And
That was Johnny Miller's dad.
pardon?
Johnny Miller's dad.
Yes, that's exactly right. That lead me into the next story. We do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I wiped up there.
Yeah, and,
Yeah, that was Johnny
yeah,
Miller.
that was his operation, yeah. It was a good place to go plink with your BB gun or whatever, and they had a water pond there where you talk about turtles, you get some big turtles out of there from time to time. But anyway, you mentioned Mr. Miller, which brings in a special story to me about John Miller. I don't know if any of you guys knew John Miller or not. I know Dave does. John was just a fixture in the community. He was a fine young man, but he had some deficiencies mentally, okay? But despite that, you would say, well, it didn't make any difference to all the people around him. We just accepted John Miller for what he was. He played on Davy's football team. He's pictured with the very first football team that Juniata Valley had. Now, I'm sure he wouldn't know what to do, but through guidance, they worked him through. But one thing about John, being a little bit deficient mentally, he had some things that just was remarkable to me. He knew everybody's license plate number in town.
Birthdays.
He knew what kind of car everybody had. He knew when birthdays were. I would be sitting on my porch, and he lived right across the street from me. He would be walking down toward the Keystone Garage or someplace. Hey, Diz, today's Carl's birthday, my brother's birthday, you know. He was remarkable with that. Now, how can you explain that as an educator? I can't. I mean, today they would probably have him put in some kind of a gifted program. But he was just John Miller, and that's what we accepted him as. And I can still see him going to church every Sunday, you know, and his favorite hangout was the Keystone Garage. And I think he loved to go there because the owner would torment the daylights out of him. I mean, he would. Matter of fact, in some cases, I think it was very unkind, some of the tricks that they pulled on him, you know. But John went along with it. And eventually he ended up in, I think he was living in the old hotel for a while. I don't know, I lost.
Briefly, I believe, yeah. But you never saw him mad, never saw him.
No, he was just John Miller to me. And he was just, you know, that's what we need today, is just accept people for what they are and forget about it. And of course, you mentioned Roy Grove. He had a daughter who was mentally challenged as well. And I think it was the same way. They just accepted her, you know, for whatever she was. She went to school, and Mr. Grove tried to get her into some different schools and so on.
We have a guy back here that has a question. The Jim Foster guy.
Jim.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's been wonderful listening to stories again. But I've lived here a long time, and I like to consider myself a resident. But I've always been, my bucket list is about empty. And I've always been mystified by the Wolverton Mansion. And I don't know anything about it. I've lived here, I've looked at it. What did it look like in a blue-collar, poor neighborhood in your childhood days? Who were those people, and how did it affect, or did it, anything here? I don't know anything about it.
I will tell you a little story that I know about the Wolvertons, and it's not about the Wolverton family. I'm sure Sam could enlighten you about the Wolvertons, who they were. Obviously, they were wealthy, and they made their money in the Philadelphia, New York market, whatever. Yeah, and this is, his money is, and the Thompson money gave us this library. But one of the things that we would also do at Melvin Lane's restaurant, when things would go dry, well, we got something else to do. Well, the only place that there was a swimming pool was up in Wolverton's. Okay. Well, we were never invited as a group. So off we would go from the restaurant. We would go down across the railroad tracks, right below the barns, where the road goes up to the house. If you just veer off a little bit to your right, you go into the shrubbery. Well, that was our place where we changed to our bathing suit, which nobody had a bathing suit. But we got prepared for the swim, and remember Mr. Reed, he was the guy who worked for the Wolvertons.
Oscar Peyton Reed.
So we would get prepared, and we couldn't take our time. It's time to go swimming. So off we would go in a chain, hit the swimming pool, and as soon as you hit the pool, Mr. Reed turned the light on. I don't know if he was doing that for a favor for us, but we hit the pool right through out the other side, back down to the area where our clothes was. So, the Wolvertons were great people, as I understand. So could you tell them about the background of the family?
Well, I just know, as you pointed out, I mean, they got their money early in the oil and transportation in New York. I think they were, Mr. Wolverton was in the transport business up there now.
That was Thompson,
That was
New York, and Philadelphia.
Mr. Wolverton.
Chuck, when I was started to teach, your dad was the custodian at the high school.
Uh-huh.
And he used to fill me in at some of the things that happened back in the Wolverton era. And he said, I can remember when Mr. Wolverton brought his train in and parked it down here along someplace. He had his own cars. But what he was doing, he was bringing he used the horses to transport whatever back and forth from Philadelphia to New York. And he had to have a place to keep the horses. And of course, there was a waste situation there. So he would load that waste, the manure, onto the railroad cars and bring it up to his farm here in Alexandria. That came from your dad.
Yeah.
So,
It just always seemed like Camelot to me. And I wondered how you, as young people, viewed that. Was it just another place, or was it part of here, or was it, wow? Did you wish anything? I don't know what the feelings were like for this. Excellent. I know where they came from.
Well, Jim, it was sort of in the wow kind of thing in those days. But Mr. Wolverton was a grandson and related to the town founder, long time, as was Thompson.
Yeah.
And Wolverton went to New York and developed a draying business where in the draying, it's what it was called today it'd be a trucking business, used horses a lot and delivered stuff around New York and had an exhaust system, horse exhaust system they had to get rid of. And they put that on cars and brought it up the branch here to Hatfield, where the same place that they brought clay down from the clay banks, and that Hatfield, they unloaded the manure and spread it out on fields, one of them being, there you are, right there, right in the property that she owns right now. And that was river bottom country. It's down below town, heading in that flat area, which was it was not fertile in any way whatsoever because of floods. And the floods would wash out all the nutrients that would allow for good land. There's nothing but clay. And Mr. Wolverton then used that, scattered the manure there. It's John Eberly's wife's father, as a young man, helped to unload those cars and spread the manure, and it got turned in that way. That changed those fields into being very, very fertile. And he made his money in that draying business. And he was the grandson of the town founder. And that's his photograph, well, painting, right there. That's Mr. Wolverton. And the other end of the room is Mr. Thompson, who looks an awful lot like Tim Speck. For whatever reason. Or maybe it's the other way around. But anyway, Mr. Thompson, a cousin, is the one that was the railroader. And he was instrumental in building this branch up through here, because it helped his cousin get the manure from New York to here, and built this line up along here, and he built a summer home. And that was the Horns lived there. That was originally the Thompson Mansion, Mr. William Thompson. And he had 3 guest houses. And he would bring his city folk up. This was pre-air conditioning, hotter than the 7 brass hinges in the summertime, and they would come out and stay in these guest houses during summer and then come up here by train. The home I grew up in was one of the guest houses. Other one is the one between a house and the hotel. And the third one is the house that you live in, right across the street, between the 2 churches. And those were original guest houses. And they were mighty, mighty fine guest houses. But people lived there the whole summer. And Mr. Thompson had built that, unfortunately, some number of years ago. What the year was, I don't know, it burned to the ground. Mrs. Horn and one of her sons were perished in the fire. The only thing remaining of that original Thompson structure is the gate out in front of the house, which is visible from Lois Hall, Shelton Avenue, not Back Street, Shelton Avenue, right across the way. And the original barn is still there. That was a carriage house that we now have, and it was the Thompson Hose Company. Over in the bank, today, the original Thompson carriage is there. The hose, thank you. The hose cart is still there. When owned the house, after the Horns, somebody bought a banker's son. Forget who that was that bought that house. But Chubb, we know somebody. Well, anyway, that guy was a sort of an anti-social rascal. And he wanted that barn, the carriage house, cleaned out. He wanted no parts of that hose wagon. So, was Rich and myself, and probably Tim, we got a hold of that thing and took it out and put it out in the barn out at the cabin. And it stayed there for a number of years until the barn just needed to be dismantled. It was falling apart. And then we brought it in here, and it's across the street today. That's that Thompson hose cart. Now, it was a hand pumper. It carried a lot of hose. And you used up and down this back alley here. And that was part of the Thompson operation. He had enough property that he was really interested in fire protection. The two of them kind of go together.
Walter, you had mentioned about the horns.
Yes.
I'd like to tell a personal story that I had with the Horn family. You know, like I said, I just had the greatest respect for them. I think John Horn was just a great guy. When I came back here from college, one of the things I did was assistant football coach and baseball coach for the Valley. Well, Eric was his son we were talking about. He was in school and he loved baseball. He just loved baseball. Eric, I think he had a leukemia type cancer, I'm not sure.
Oh, Steve.
Yeah,
That was Steve's boy.
Steve.
Yeah.
Steve or
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Eric is, I don't know.
Eric is still alive.
He's our next.
Okay, and it was Steve.
Steve,
It was
Steve, yeah.
Steve, okay.
Good. Cute.
So, he wanted to play baseball, and I know, I wanted to help him. And, he was on the team, and, every year his dad would take him to Florida to see baseball games, you know. And he would just delighted to come home to show me the new glove and show me the baseballs that he got autographed and so on, you know. And I just loved that boy. And I worked with him a little bit, and it was a challenge for him to play the game, to be honest with you. But I says, I will give you an opportunity to play. Well, his dad called me one day while I was in school and says this, he says, you don't have to put him into a game. I says, I'll give him a chance to play. When the time is right, I will get him in. And that particular year, Bob, you were probably on the team, and we were playing down at Mount Union. And we did not have a real successful season. But that particular game, as I recall, we were winning. And I put Eric in, or Steve, I'm sorry, as a middle infielder. I put him as shortstop. And Joe Davis was in the background. Well, Joe let me know that I'm making a mistake. I said, he said, you're gonna lose this game. I said, I've lost lots of games. And I says, if I lose this game, I says, I'll take it. I'll take the loss, but Steve's gonna play shortstop. So I put him in for a couple innings, and lo and behold, there was a ground ball hit to him, and he tossed it to second baseman for the out, you know. So it made this old guy very, very happy.
I think that on that very happy and very touching note, we're going to.
Steve. Steve was born August the 16th, 1944. And my brother, Randy, was born August 17th. And the two of them had a very good relationship. I mean, there they are, and here we are down Main Street, living in one of their houses. And they had a very, very good relationship. And Steve was a fine man. The Horns had 8 kids. 8 of them, and the oldest one, Phyllis, was a classmate of mine. And I used to be able to name all 8 of them, probably still could if I had. Thank goodness I don't have to.
Thank you all for coming. This has been a wonderful afternoon. Thank these two guys, I mean,
You don't need to tip us.
Oh, yeah,
we have lots of cookies and drinks left, supposed to be some. Thank you.
Older than me. I know.
Hey, whoa.
I know where it is. Yes, sir.
Call me the library rat.
Yes, exactly. This fella here is Dave Sheriff.